Hello, everyone. Today is Friday, September 25th. Um, I'm your host for Collectibles and Coffee, Edward Nguyen. Today I have another interview, very special guest. He is someone that I've had the pleasure of meeting once or twice in real life. None other than Mike Linneman. We may know him, most of us, as Vorthos Mike on Twitter. He is also one of the admins of the MTG art group. I won't go too much into this. I'd rather let Mike tell us a bit about himself here. So let's get right into it. Well, today we'll mostly be covering something that's a little bit outside the scope of what we normally talk about. It does kind of fall in the realm of collectibles. This is something that has had peaking interest over the past year or two compared to in the past. Let's hop right in. Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and really where your sphere is.
Sure. So I'm Vorthos Mike. A name I did not choose. Someone just called me that, and then another person did. And as soon as you dislike the thing, it sticks. That's always how it works. I guess I'm a lot of things, largely with art. There's not a single term. I guess I'd be Magic's curator, I guess would be the closest term, I guess. I write on art. I do, and been doing that for years and years. I do magic art shows. Some people have been to them, and they enjoyed them. I get yelled at by Brazil to please do them every year, and I'm like, I know, I can hear you. I work with artists a lot behind the scenes. Pricing, what should I do? Info, blah. Help brokering works, which is helping them bring an artwork to market in both visible and behind the scenes ways. It's both. Down to really helping people appreciate art in our little niche of the art world, where people may not even see the art. It becomes just a visual shorthand for a card, but then showing them the depth and the nuance and the importance of really how vital it is.
So just some context for people who may not be fully aware. Vorthos is one of the magic terms. It's one of the personalities, very similar to how we understand Spike as a very competitive player, Johnny as a more combo-centric player, Timmy as kind of your go-to casual, probably what people interpret as an EDH player. Vorthos is someone who is heavily, to my understanding, heavily into the lore and story.
The Ghibli bits that aren't gameplay oriented, and Vorthos's weird cousin is the Melvin people that want the full text land, so there's no art. It's just like text box and words. It's really the people that want the beauty of the game, frame, flavor text, art, story, importance, social commentary, more than just the card. And there's an incredible depth to it, and you can see when things don't go right that people react to them, a flavorful set and not a flavorful set, callbacks, nuances. You can have commentary on community even. So there's a lot there, and I do the narrow piece on just the art and what the art means and does.
Yeah, I think just that kind of gives people some perspective as to why Vorthos, because that's kind of an older term. It's probably not something that we see as common.
Yeah, no, it was a more of a thing. Matt Cavada, former artist, and now he's a creative director at Wizards, been there forever, really coined the term because he's like, there's these people, what do you call them? And then the term came about as it is the D&D player's not actual name, it's his D&D character's name, and he goes by that. And people struggled with pronouncing my last name for a little while, which, never happens to anybody, right, Ed? And they're like, you're that art Vorthos guy, Vorthos Mike, that's it. And I'm like, okay, that's how it's going to be. All right, that's what we're doing now. And then it just kind of stuck from there.
Fair enough. So that's a bit about yourself. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got your start? Why magic art, right? Because that's kind of, that's much, it's very niche thing. It's a niche thing and already a niche hobby. Right.
Sure. I mean, I grew up in Germany as a kid, so my cultural reference was Grimm fairy tales, and they're not Disney fairy tales. Everyone always gets thrown into an oven or eaten or something. They're very, very grotesque at times. So I had that basis of this medieval-y, fantasy-esque art growing up, and I played Magic when I was a little kid. Played it in the Boy Scouts because you'd be bored on trips, and played in the tent. From there, I knew I wanted to be in art, museum, something, somehow. So I studied art history, worked for a museum, out of college. Recession happened. No one worked in museums anymore. Weird. From there, I worked as an art director, a TCG, LCG art director. So I've done Star Wars and Warhammer and a bunch of stuff. Went out of that. I work in the nonprofit world now, and I do philanthropic things that you may see every now and then me working on. It's usually art-based because that's what I know. And then really doing art shows once or twice a year. And all of that happening, I would write about magic art and little things of, take a look at this piece. Here's a high-res art that you can see detail because, you know, before Twitter, people didn't share them. They'd be in the mothership for wallpapers or websites, and that's it. There was no other way to get art other than visiting them with a print at a show. And living in the Midwest, we have zero magic artists in Minnesota. None. We had Winona Nelson, but she moved away. So for us, we had to find other ways to really engage with that. So I'm like, okay, well, this doesn't have much prominence. Like, I know how to talk about this. I don't know how to do a sideboard for Infect, but I can talk about the art really well. So I pitched it at the time to Trick Jarrett, who's been at Wizards now forever. And then just started writing on it once a week, different parts, talked about alterations, talked about artist proofs with sketches in the back, talked about prints, talked about canvas prints, talked about paintings and all of the process involved. And the weird nuanced things on it, like why does a signature cost $2 now? Well, there's reasons for that. There's rationale for that. And there's background in that people would love to know. And they found it interesting. And then my Twitter account would be following artists, talking with them to say, hey, your art is out. Please post your picture. And they'd be like, thank you. Because I knew who they were and I would pay attention to them. And then by doing that, you become known as the person that helps get art out. And by doing that, you start getting preview cards, then you focus on art, and then it just kind of stacks from there. And then it just, whenever there's an art thing, you just get tagged into it and you just respond from there.
Very cool. I think my first real interaction with art, I actually don't even know if you're a part of it, you didn't mention it, but I think in 2013, the first Grand Prix Vegas, I believe there was an art event there. It was something that was kind of in a corner, but I believe it was original magic art.
And first Vegas, they had a couple pieces at the first Vegas.
Yeah, it was kind of like a gallery set up. Like there were, you know, the stands, and then they had the art like pinned up.
You may be thinking of Vegas 2, which was the big one that we had. That's the side room that we had. But the one they've had always at art at shows. Vendors used to have it. Mm-hmm. Shops used to buy art and sell them online and bring them to like shows. Just nobody really thought of it at the time because they're like, ooh, $800. I gotta buy these $30 dual lands. Like what? So it was just like this so ridiculous expensive thing. And then the recession happened. And then art prices bottomed out just to nothing, literally to nothing, like $100, $200 card art. Like it was bad. And then from there, we brought prominence to it and it really raised it up. And then the first Vegas there, second Vegas, we did huge. And then that became a thing now. Now we do art shows one to three a year, depending on the year.
Interesting. I'll have to look through my pictures. I think I took pictures at the time, so maybe I'll like share them with you and see if it kind of...
Throw them on the Twitters, of course.
So this was 2013. This is a while ago, but just to kind of help some of our audience who may not be as familiar with art just as intimately, right? Like what is like some of the traditional art that we see, right? Because that's really what we're talking about here, right? This is kind of like, this is relatively divorced from what people think of when Magic, right? Because all they see is the end product, right? We're seeing, I open up a booster pack, oh, this card has cool art, and that's kind of where it ends for people, right? But obviously there's so much more to the art, the traditional art part of it, kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah, so it's a 2-inch by 3-inch box, right? So everybody sees it small, and you can't see brushstrokes, right? That's the biggest thing, is you can't see them. They're too small. So the assumption is that everything's digital, or everything's digital. Everything's so shiny. It doesn't look like it was in 1994. And you're like, there's reasons for that. And thank God it doesn't anymore, because there's professionals now that do this, that win art awards, like Seb McKinnon and so on. But that idea of collecting art is... Most people, when they mean that, they mean oil paintings. They mean acrylic paintings. They mean on canvas. They mean on paper, pencil sketches, graphite on paper. Like that's what they mean. But it's so much wider than that. Like a digital artist saying, all right, I'm going to make a unique canvas of an artwork. And that's the only thing I'm ever going to make of it. And you're like, well, it's not a traditional painting. It's like, well, yes, but this is the only thing he'll ever make. So this is now collectible. This is the thing. And Seth McKinnon really brought that to the forefront to say, he's like, well, why don't I use the term from the art world called a monotype, which is like a, like a print run. You make prints, you do the thing, you make another one, you make another one. Well, monotype is you just do a single one and you hand embellish and hand sign it and all that jazz, and that's it. That idea is finally taken over in the Magic world, where people say, well, I guess this isn't the thing you turned into Wizards. That was a digital file you sent digitally. But if I want to own this is the only way for me to put it on my wall. This is it. Literally, this is it. So people have started to now raise the prominence of those aspects. But most people, it's like, I want the painting. I want, I'm new to the collecting field. I want Llanowar elves from Alpha. And you're like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But you could start somewhere. And finding people get acclimated to that, to say, well, this is my favorite deck. I played when I was a little kid. I'm now older. I have more expendable money. I already have my whole vintage deck. It's all Alpha. Cool. What else can I do? Well, I won this tournament with this card. Maybe I could get the art to that card. That'd be kind of cool. Like, can you imagine Ignite Memories? He should own that. That would make sense. It, harkens back to him every time that he can't play, he can see it on the wall. So that idea has happened already too. Every one of the pieces, every major significant card you can think of from Magic's past is already sold. Every single one. They're just in collector hands already. And the ones that aren't in collector hands that are with artists are now fully aware and have held on to some. Like Dark Ritual is still with the artist. It's probably going to cost at least $500,000 to get it, but it's still with the artist if you want it. And that price is not outlandish either. That is probably what it costs. And that's weird, but people get acclimated to that.
Yeah, I think that's like just kind of going back to like the mediums that people think about, right? Like this is especially like in the case of Dark Ritual, right? Like we're talking about something that was painted 27 years ago at this point, right? Like well before digital media was the norm, right? Now, obviously most Magic art and just art that we conventionally see, right? Usually done via graphic software, right? It's just a medium that they use. A lot of artists nowadays market themselves as digital artists because that's just what they're familiar with, right? But when you're talking about, like in the case of Dark Ritual, $500,000, we'll talk about pricing it a little bit, obviously.
Sure. Of course.
Yeah, like these are like mediums. Like these two pieces are behind me. Like this is a Zergling, and this is a scene from StarCraft. These are actually original. These are original oils as well.
Sure.
And then they were done by a Blizzard, former Blizzard employee, art director for StarCraft 2. Obviously, I have a few other Blizzard pieces I really like.
Sure.
And he said, like, one of the things that when he was working at Blizzard, he was certainly the oldest, and he was one of the few people that actually dealt in physical mediums like this anymore. Especially, like, granted, Blizzard, right? They make World of Warcraft, they make StarCraft. Very different things, right? When you're making for a computer game, you're naturally going to have more people that do this. So finding things like this pretty rare in the context of Magic, right? Like, it's certainly trended that way as well, right? Like, obviously, Alpha art, all original, right? And most of those in collector hands.
Almost all original. Almost. You'd be surprised. Circle of Protection Black is digital. And one of the islands is actually digital.
That's interesting. Yeah. My mind's kind of blown now.
Those are both totally digital. And people are like, oh, they couldn't tell back then. It's like, yep, they were doing it all the way back then, but it just wasn't talked about as much. Just because that's not the process. You sent it in, the scanner was this big, so paintings had to be this big. I have an Alpha, and it's this big. It's tiny. They're all tiny because that's how big the scanner was. Once the scanner got bigger, then they could have bigger artworks.
Yeah, and I think like just kind of it's really cool to see kind of the evolution of art. Right now, we have a lot of original art that people are making. The original is done on these larger canvases. Probably like it's pretty rare to see one that's like this size behind me. This is certainly on the larger end of them. But like I do see like a lot of people, especially for things like Zendikar Rising, right? We see a lot of lands, right? Like lands visually, like they tend to be bigger pieces. It's much more impressive looking. But since you did kind of touch on price on it, like let's kind of delve into the art market because I'm sure that's a little bit.
What do you want to know, Ed? What do you want to know? Hit me.
So when we think about like fine art, right? Like just this because this is the closest parallel we have, right? Like people like equate like buying dual lands as like buying like penny stocks in real life, right? Like it's kind of the same thing, right? So
Fair.
like our closest analogy, right, when we look at magic art, right, when we compare it to fine art, right, like we see that fine art obviously has a very, very large premium on it. Usually it's in the hand of like collectors. Usually they're done through major auction houses like Christie's, Sotheby's, Heritage, etc.
Sure.
So in the art market itself, just to start things off, like where does one even go to find art?
Sure. You talk to the artist. Yay. But that doesn't always work anymore. So you find it in a few places. Even fine art things, it's not just Christie's, because there's, senior art shows at every colleges that they always have a sale, and that stuff's super affordable. There's galleries everywhere. Not every gallery is expensive either. And always in a gallery, asking price is not the real price. Always, always, always. So trying to determine, okay, well, Magic doesn't have a gallery. There used to be one in like the 90s, and there was a whole shenanigans about that. But there isn't a specific Magic focused gallery. That doesn't exist yet. So you can pick it up through the artist, which would be, you contact them and say, hey, I'd like to purchase this from you. And if your price is good, sometimes they say yes. That's more rare these days because of how rapid the field has moved. Often, if an artist gets an immediate offer on a card, they have to wonder, how good is this card? Is this card amazing? You offer me $10,000. That seems like a lot. But am I turning down $30,000 if I sell it to you? And that's very, very real as a current thing. So you ask an artist, sometimes you can buy it through them. Donato Giancola happens sometimes. MTG Art Market, we've worked very, very, very hard to drive people. It's a big Facebook group. For many people, it's the only reason they're still on Facebook. I'll be honest. I've heard that many times. And there's auctions going on constantly, like every day. Literally every day there's something being sold. There's an auction ending, if not every day, every other day. Sunday nights are always super busy. It's USA focused, so an auction end, USA times, right? So if you're overseas, often there's people that will help. They'll do proxy bidding, increment stuff of that sort. And then eBay, of course. Most things on eBay, though, are advertisements. Like, they're not really priced to move. They're really just to show up there. This is what this person has for sale in their collection. Chris Ron is pretty much the only notable one that sells on eBay consistently. But everybody else, it used to be there, and now has either sell directly, sell through their website, sell at events like IllexCon. It's a little illustration convention west of Philadelphia by like an hour that you can't take transit to. It's really hard to get to in Reading. And then this art market. The art market is 10,000 people and hundreds and hundreds of sales all the time. And, people pay attention long enough, they'll find something inexpensive. It just may not be the exact card they're looking for from 1998 that did a thing. But if you ask for it and you have the pockets to pay for it, a lot of the collectors will respond and say, oh yeah, I know who has that, or I have that. It's this much, or not for sale, or whatever the things are. And it's the place where we all congregate at the current time. We don't sit on Reddit or Twitter or Tumblr. It's really the Facebook group is where most of the things happen.
I just want to back up. I didn't want to interrupt you, but it is important to note that when artists are designing a card, right? You had said in the context of, someone offered me 10,000, right? How much is this art really worth, right? Is it worth 30? Sure. We see it's sometimes posted on Magic Gathering on the Mothership. They post articles about it. A lot of these artists, they don't actually know what their card does when they're given the task, when they're given the job. It's simply draw, right? In the weird four-legged alien, right? That's the extent to which they know, right? Or they have very
to some extent. I mean, if you get a planeswalker, it's planeswalker because the vertical, right? You're like, this is Jace, and you're like, I know who Jace is. Or if it's like, this is a legendary character, because they get commissioned different prices. So, this is a rare or legendary, or this is a planeswalker. But if there's like a common or an uncommon, and it's a playable blue spell, no idea. Literally no idea how good the card is unless it's a reprint. If it's a reprint, they would obviously know because they can look it up.
Right. Yeah. So it's just kind of these very vague things, right? It's kind of hard again to pinpoint exactly how good is this going to be.
Right.
And that's obviously a kind of a big driving factor, right? Naturally, more playable cards, more visibility, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things. It's not like just good art as well, right? Like that's
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a piece that we could always talk about is to say, like, if you have an uncommon card that's a zombie lord, right? Pumps your team, whatever, in a random set. The artist just knows they're making a zombie card. Like, they don't understand how important the card is to casuals. They have no idea how important it is to commander players. Like, that piece, they may paint small because they just don't know how good it is. And that will actually affect the final price. And had they known, they would have painted huge. And that happens a lot with commons and uncommons. And a trend artists are doing now is they're just painting everything slightly larger. Like, it's hard to find pieces under 10 inches on the side. It's just really uncommon now. And that used to be the norm, 8 by 10, 8 by 10. And now almost everything's 11 by 14 or larger. Almost everything.
so. Just this was on the outline, but out of my curiosity, and I'm sure others are wondering as well. How much work goes into making an original? Obviously, it varies, right? Like, there's a lot going on, but just kind of like your average 8 by 10 piece.
Piece, sure. Well, there's stages to it. You get contacted by an art director, and often it's how much can you handle, right? It's if you're new, you get a piece, maybe two. If you're like Adam Paquette, who got like over 12 for Zendikar, he had a full set of basics, he had a bunch of just wild amount of stuff. You have to prove yourself to know that you're reliable to cover those. It's not necessarily how good you are. It's can you work fast enough to meet the deadlines and be reliable enough to cover a wider swath? You can do landscapes, you can do people, you can do anything. That's an art director determines that. They get a hold of you. It's like 7 weeks. You send work on sketches. You send them sketches, whether traditional or digital, whatever they are. Usually, if you do traditional ones, you just scan them and then send them over by email. Then from there, for digital work, you can have more revisions because it's easier to change them. Whereas a traditional one, they may have like progress pictures. This is where I'm here. This is where I'm here. This is where I'm here. And then from there, it takes them days to a week or two, or 3 or 4, depending on how big the piece is. For something like an Ugin, like a Ryan Pankos, that takes weeks to make. Just depth, size, importance. You can't punt on that. It has to look good because it will be the face of marketing. And other pieces that they have, some people just work really fast. Like Chris Rallis, he makes a lot of like the booster box art, if you've noticed. He works really fast. So they're like, okay, we can put you in booster box thing, and if we have to switch something around, you'll have time to give us another version of it. And that's fine. So generally a couple weeks per person per piece. And when people have a few of them, they have to figure out how do you have, okay, I sent this into my art director. Now I'm going to work on this at sketch stage. And when I get feedback back, I need to be able to send them more feedback to it and continue on through for, weeks to months. People can do this as a full-time job, which was not super possible like even 10, 15 years ago. Original art sales are part of it. Signed signatures are part of it. Sketches on things are part of it, that you can do this as a career. It's just really hard to stay in because there's always new 23-year-olds. There's always new young talent coming up that's wanting to take your spot. But the reliability is really what keeps people in. Is you do a set after set after set on time, good work, they're going to keep hiring you.
Yeah, I think like you had mentioned, obviously it's with a lot more visibility, right? It is nice to see that artists are getting kind of the attention that they deserve. I think that was something that was certainly lost for a little while. I think that probably kind of lines up with when, to my understanding, there's probably kind of a period when we saw less original art being done. I think it's certainly seen kind of a resurgence more recently.
Yeah.
Right, because like obviously like they know that
there's money in it.
There's money in it, right? If I land like Ugin, like the face of the set, right? Ugin is the face of Core 21. It's on the booster boxes. It's on the collector boosters. They can do very well with that, right? So how do you think? I'm trying to think of how to word this in a somewhat tactful way. How do you think artists have responded to their art ballooning in price the way it has, right? Because this is a relatively recent thing, right? Like this is kind of
relatively. I like how you use the balloon analogy too, because that bubble pop thing comes up a lot. I know that every digital artist is trying to do something traditionally now. Nearly every single one, whether it's a pencil sketch, whether it's a color test, a color study, a color rough, something, because any amount of time you put into that right now is worth it. Like sketches used to be worth like $20. Like they were just no one would buy them. Like just nobody. Again, card art was $100 to $200. I was at Spectrum One and I bought pieces. I was at Gen Con during that time, and it was outlandish how cheap it was. But that's bad. That's a bad thing for the market, because what we want is more traditional works across everybody. And if sales are higher, more people are going to do them. There's some weird things that are happening behind the scenes, though. A lot of digital folks picking up paintbrushes after not using them for like 10, 15 years. I'm a concept artist. I'm working in a concept studio. Sure. You don't have time to paint things every day. But now it's like, well, there's money to be made here. I'm going to give that a try, but the quality isn't the same. So it's a very real balancing act. If you have 3 pieces and you're normally a digital person, which one can you accomplish traditionally that doesn't sacrifice quality, that you can get done at the same time to maintain 3 works per set? Super nuanced, super behind the scenes stuff, but that's what people are wrestling with. And art directors are now wrestling with that too, to say, I used to be able to give you feedback easily for digital works, but now traditional, it's different. So we will see more of it, and it won't slow down anytime soon. More people are going to be picking up paintbrushes. More people are going to be trying to do it because the money is serious. It's significant to their income each year.
What are some of like the more notable sales, right? Like we're talking about this, right? Like I don't think people again fully have an aware are fully aware of like just how valuable magic art is, right? Because again,
Sure.
right, the prices have certainly gone up. We have seen like more interest in the market, more people are getting in,
Right.
There's more visibility on it, right? Like what are some of the notable sales, just to provide context for some recent sets, right? Some in the past few years.
Sure. Well, I think you can start at the top and bottom, right? Like you used to be able to find card art for in the hundreds. That now is gone. That is gone. Like the floor, we had a thread on our art market that used to be original art under $1,000. That is only sketches now. Color studies. There's no finals in there anymore. And if it is, it's like $950 or something right underneath the threshold. And then it's like this big. The floor is now about $1,500 to $2,000 for any original painting, like a final painting, not like a sort of, but like a final. Like this is what they turned in, $2,000. Planeswalkers start at $5,000, because if people get one and they paint them, they're going to do them slightly larger. So they basically start at $5,000. Significant legendaries, I would say, all probably start around $3,000 these days, or any legendary, because you can play it in Commander, and then you can own your Commander, which is kind of cool. The highest ones as of late usually are with reprinted cards, because you know what they are. There's no risk. Is this card going to be good or not? Like, you know what the thing is. So the Doubles Master set, we had record-breaking levels of sales that most of them didn't even go to auction. Like, they were done by private offer. People didn't want to know who they were. And there were numerous things that were sold $15,000 in a matter of minutes. We had a couple at 25. There was some at 30. There was a 40, and then one above that even. Obviously, the ones that are the highest prices are not usually public. There was a Arcbound Ravager sold, I think, last year, and it was like $45,000 at auction. It's one of the few times that a major playable card in Infinity was seen. Large things like alphas. Any alpha basically starts at $35,000. Doesn't matter which one it is. Just the floor is about $35,000. And the ones that go off market are, who knows? They're tens of thousands, significantly more. There was a big article on Heritage Auctions about, was it Shahrazad? The Kaha Folio one. And that was really the first major visible sale. It was verified. An auction house had 2 very motivated bidders that wanted it. Folio art is very, very hard to find. Just really is difficult. People don't sell them very often. And it was like 72, which is significant because you still have to pay 20% above it at Heritage. So that adds up quick. And because of that, it brought in other collectors. Oh, I only collect D&D art, but this Magic art's taken off. I'm going to invest in it. Or I have money from Bitcoin. I'm going to put some in magic art because some of the stuff is selling. I want to get old school art. I want to get Arabian Nights art. Like we saw that for about 6 months. People trying to scoop up what they could, and then all of it was just gone. And now it's like really high prices to find anything. You can look at eBay and see a bunch of those. But most pieces, when people start out, they start in that $2,000, $3,000 category. Some people do take trade. There's a couple collectors that do when they sell works or resell works, but it's uncommon to do so. And payment plans are very common. It's very common for someone to buy an artwork and take 4 months, 6 months to pay it off. That's happens every day, which is unlike like power. Like nobody puts a Moxjet on layaway. That's weird.
Yeah, I think like part of that is just kind of like some parallels to like the fine art market, right? We see a lot of things, right? Like so with Heritage, right? One of the things you alluded to was 72,000. Was that the final price with buyer's premium or before?
I think it's with. I knew you were gonna ask this, Ed. I knew you were gonna bring the heat on me on this.
So you can look it up, but so a lot of these higher end auctions, right? Most of these auction houses, they do have something that's called a buyer's premium. That's not something we're as familiar with through like conventional means like eBay or whatever. Most of them do fall below the threshold where that applies. But buyer's premium means that when you're buying something, you are paying the rake on top of that. So that's what is referred to as a buyer's premium. Most of these auction houses, it's anywhere from 10 to 20. It's usually broken down by category. Certain categories are naturally higher than other categories. But 10 to 20%, right? Like on 72,000, right? Even
no, it's 72 is what it was. The auction was, and it was 20% on top of that.
Right. So assuming like 10%, right? You're looking at like 80,000 for this painting through Heritage at this point.
Yeah.
So like that's
a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. So I think like it's really interesting because like the market, from what I've seen, right? I'm not like intimately into it. My brain unfortunately just doesn't work that way. I'm not inherently an artistic person. I do love going to museums. I do appreciate them. I just have a very hard time getting into art the way that, like yourself, for example, right? Like you said you worked in a museum at one point, right? Like I think, right. It's very interesting to see a lot of people, again, observation, right? Like inside the Facebook groups, you have some people that have clearly very deep pockets, right? Because I think there is the level of investing involved, right? People that have deep pockets, right? Like do buy this. How do you think investing or reselling has kind of changed the face of the game?
Ooh, yeah, that's a big one. Personally, I really dislike investing in art because it's not a tangible asset that moves quickly, right? It's not gold. It's not anything else that you can sell on a whim. Like it takes effort to do it. So for me, anytime you sell a work, there is a chance of damage. Again, I worked at a museum. I worked with the registrars in the museum. I worked in rights and reproductions. And anytime things move from where they are on a wall or from a vault or whatever, there's risk of damage, risk of fire, whatever those things are. So every time it changes hands, that can come into play. So in my best world, I want the person that will pay the most for it to then hold on to it, because the more it moves, the price may not stay at that amount, right? Like if you resell it, it's either above or below. And usually as of late, it's been above, but that's only for major works, right? So that's the two sides. A major work would be like Brian Panko's Ugin, right? That's a major work, significant, visible, good card, really well done, and it's huge. Minor work from him would be like Sparring Mummy from Amonkhet. Like everyone's like, oh yeah, I played that in limited, but it's like got some mummies that are like training people in a yard. Not something you put over your couch. Not something that 1,000 people want because it's not highly playable. So it's a minor work, and you have the differences of there. So when people come in to invest and want to resell, often the major works aren't available, right? Because people want them. They have them in their collections. So they can buy minor works, which is fine. But the threshold to make any money on minor works is considerably lower, just by nature. So that's the weird part of when people come and invest, like I want to have 30 works, you're probably not going to have very many major works in there that are museum quality, appreciate really high, you could sell easily to people, and so on. So finding what people want and what they're looking for is really, you have to watch for a while. And that's very different from any other thing. It's not like you can just read a bunch of articles and just learn what it is, because it's rapidly changing. Every set, it differs. And every set, there's more traditional works, going from 10% to 30% to more. And it's like, okay, and there's all these more sketches now. If you get a painting and a sketch, is it worth more? What if you don't have that? How does that change in price valuation? Is hard. It's just difficult. So finding, when watching what all the market moves, seeing what's selling and what isn't, like angels do well, demons do well, dragons do well. That's obvious. But then it's, okay, well, what is right below that? Do drakes do as well as dragons? No. But drakes are also not usually highly playable cards. But it could be something you could have that some people remember playing with it during limited, and it was something you'd play a lot during that limited season, and people would want that eventually, and that would be something to invest in. So it takes some background knowledge of the game itself and of the artist itself to say who's on the rise, who's going from okay to real good, and is going to start getting major works all the time, that their name will be synonymous with quality. Like Donato Giancola is synonymous with quality in the Magic world. Living master. Ryan Pankos is on that trajectory to being like, oh yeah, everybody wants one in their collection. John Avon, you want one in your collection. Or a variety of other people that you just want one piece. It doesn't matter what it is. But then that helps it move from a minor work to, well, every one of these pieces are kind of major. And then there's the ridiculous popular ones by this artist. Those sort of things are really, you just have to have like charts and follow the things. But we're always happy to explain that to people. If anybody ever wants to invest in buy art, that's what our group is for. Our admins, you can ask at any time, bounce ideas off. I'm looking for this. Here's my budget. What should I do? We do that every day as well.
Yeah, I think that's like a really good part. Like the admin team for the FG art group, like phenomenal group of people. Anyone who's looking to get in, I definitely recommend like joining the group. I'm sure there's a lot of people there that are simply there just to see the art, right? Like some of these people probably just don't have the means or just ability to own some of these art, right? But I'm sure that doesn't prevent them from enjoying it. I would encourage anyone who even has the slightest hint of interest to join the group, to take a look at it, because there's a lot of really like phenomenal things, just kind of the full spread, right? You can see a lot of very cool things. Some things are surprisingly affordable, right? Sketches, right? Like sketches are out there, right? Not everyone can own like a large original Ugin, for example, right? But there were sketches for Ugin. They were more expensive than your traditional sketches, but,
fair,
right? But they were there, right? And that was certainly much more accessible, right? Because obviously, like, you know, with most asset classes, right, as when things go up a little bit in price, it starts to remove a lot of people that can afford it, right? That's just the nature of assets, right? Like, right, like, you know, like selling Magic cards on a very basic principle, right? Like a lot of people who want to do away with reserve lists, it's just so much easier to sell $10 cards than $100 cards, and we're talking more than 10 times easier. We're talking like 100 times easier, right? People that can drop $10, very easy to do so. $100, not so much, right? In case of art, right, like you had mentioned, right, $1,500 to $2,000 is roughly where they all begin now, and we're probably talking kind of like a draft limited common type thing that's just cool art.
Life gains something that you're never gonna play.
Right. Yeah. And I've definitely bought a few pieces myself, right? I can be transparent about this. I don't have hang because I only have so much wall space. But a lot of them, right, relatively affordable, but the card, like some of the art, I actually don't remember what the card does, right? Because we're talking, right, in that price range, you're not getting something iconic. A lot of the bigger pieces, like really you're looking at a pretty high floor. Like Double Masters, I remember watching it, right? Because like you had mentioned, reprints always do well, right? You know what the card does. You know exactly how powerful. I think like some of the bigger ones that popped up, I think Doubling Season was one of the ones at the top end. Right, very popular card.
Force of Will was traditionally painted.
Okay, yeah. That was the
like Force of Will. Like everybody wants that.
Right, we're talking about.
But the amount of people that can afford it is small. It's really like single digits amount of people.
Yeah. What do you think in terms of? Oh, are you all right there?
No, I'm good. I got a wiener dog walking in.
Oh. All right. Yeah. Gotta keep people fed.
No, it's all good.
Yeah. Okay. What parallels do you see between what people think of as magic art and like hobbyist art, right? Because like Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like these are all things, right? Like Blizzard has its own art page. Hearthstone art is pretty popular. Are there any pages do you think that like these kind of narrower art hobbies could take out of like fine art, right? Because fine art obviously very different animal, right? We're talking pieces that end up in like the millions, right? But like clearly not on that trajectory, right? Magic, Hearthstone, all these hobbies pretty narrow compared to owning a piece that was painted by Picasso or something, right? Sure, but I think we do see a lot of analogies, right? You said like Heritage, like they had done their first major piece with the Scheherazade, right? And I think like Magic is trending up in that direction. It wouldn't surprise me if we started to see some Magic art approach fine art levels of attention and pricing as well. Obviously,
it's always tough because it's illustration, right? That's always the piece that's separated fine art from illustration. Like that's the simple bit of you make art for what is my intention as an artist, right? This goes why that you don't have to just paint a hyper realistic picture of a person anymore because photography exists. Like it's been done. Instead, it's what is the thing you were working on and what does it mean to you and what is the commentary? Like Banksy works are not very difficult to do, but the amount of thought into the satire and into what does it mean and the fame involved in the artist is really what you're buying. You're buying a piece of culture to put in your house. Same as like an Andy Warhol soup can. Like they're not hard to do, but the scarcity of them and the meaning of them is really what you're getting. With illustration, the artist didn't make that just because they wanted to make it. They made it because they were given a prompt to do it. So that cleaving point of illustration to fine art is to say, well, illustration doesn't have a soul to it. That's the criticism. There's no artist intention to it because you're told what to do. You are the hands for the company to make the thing, right? So that's how fine art separates itself, but that's changing too. You'll find artists in illustration, whether it's Magic, World of Warcraft, whatever, that are starting to add things that have more meaning. Jason Rainville, for example, Admiral Beckett Brass, he painted his mother into it. And there's meaning of family into it and nuance in there that brought depth to the work and it approached that point where you didn't need a card to appreciate it. You could just appreciate it for just a wonderful piece of art. Donato Giancola's are very similar, where it's just, oh, this is just a piece of sci-fi art, cool, or fantasy art, cool, that you don't need the context of Magic to make it important. Okay, so the things that you can draw parallels to are Magic will have a sale at Christie's one day. Magic's going to be accessioned into museums, which is the formal adoption of an artwork into a museum. Most people, art gets into museums because people donate it. Museums don't buy art anymore, very rarely. And that point, we are months to years away when someone donates an artwork to Mopop in Seattle or donates it to Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City. And they're like, all right, yep, we would love to have the Shivan Dragon. Absolutely. We want the public to see this. We want it taken care of. We want it conserved over time. When that happens, then that cleaving point of illustration and fine art becomes narrower and narrower, and then it just becomes gray, blurring between the two. Other brands don't have it as much because the pricing hasn't jumped. There isn't enough interest. There isn't enough visibility. People don't know it exists, and so on and so forth. So when that happens, when it gets added to a museum, when there's a major auction show, and not heritage, like an actual auction house or somewhere in London has a big auction sale of this, and there's some famous people in doing so, that will change the field entirely. Where we don't just have art exhibitions, we actually have gallery shows where Magic would have a gallery show in Seattle and you can go in there and buy the art off the wall. And yeah, there's 20% premium, but that's how the gallery stays in business. And all the different nuances are part of that. We're a year or two away from that right now. I mean, very, very, very close because the prices have jumped so much. So there is something of, oh, I wish I would have started in 2012. I wish I would have started in 2015. It's like, yeah, every year is now going to be like that, where that minimum threshold jumps up a little higher and a little higher just because there's more people that want in on it. Our art market group started at 0 and we're at 10,000 people now. That's a lot of humans. And you only need one person to win the artwork. So invariably the visibility would go up and up and up, and then it's like, okay, what kind of celebrity starts collecting it? Dungeons and Dragons has one major collector that's basically scooped up nearly everything, which is kind of cool, but there's not a lot of movable reselling pieces, so it's hard to get into collecting it deep. And otherwise you'll have to find like concept art like you have behind you, which exists for places. There's artists that do work on Magic that do concept that's not digital, it's traditional. But they have to wait so many years before they can sell it. Same as like Disney. You can buy concept art from movies, but you have to wait like a really long period. And there's also weird ways to get it of that sort. But yeah, it's going to be rapidly changing, literally on a moment's notice, for where we have there, because humans want it more now. I'm doing this talk with Ed right now. Like this didn't happen 5 years ago, Ed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think like in the context of people getting in, right? People just wanting these things, whether for personal enjoyment, investing, right? Like the pandemic has really kind of just accelerated that process, right?
It has, yeah.
And I think like a big part of it is like it's the investing mantra, right? Like time in the market is better than trying to time the market, right? Like you know, it's like the idea isn't necessarily to create like unfound hype here, right? Because that's also one of the things that comes with it. I think that's naturally one of the downsides of investing, of assets, right? Of anything that is simply collectible or limited in any capacity, right? There's only so much art to go around, right? There's only so many cards in a set, right? You cull that down. Not every card has original art attached to it. You cull that down. Not every original is going to be sold publicly, right? And it keeps going down, right? And like how many of these actually hit the market. So kind of in that vein, right? Since I do have to ask, unfortunately, do you think art is something that is worth investing in the context of Magic?
I think at some level, yes. And I assume I have to make assumptions here. I have to make the assumptions that they're investing in other bits of Magic, right? Like I have so many dual lands and I have so many blah or reserve lit cards or whatever. There is a huge opportunity for investment. The wait period is a little longer, of course. But there's very easy ways to find certain artists, collect those artists' things, and absolutely make it as investments. It's not very hard to figure out which ones are investment works. You get a Chris Ron, someone will buy it for you for more in the future. That will happen. That's how that works, because everybody wants one. They want one in their collection. So I think there are definitely pit traps that are pretty huge. People getting caught up in an auction of, there's only so many pieces left in this set that have been auctioned. I just want to get one in here, and they may overpay for something. But usually it's not that much in the grand scheme. And that means the wait for a resale would just be a little longer. Instead of it being a year or two, it might be like 3 or 4 years, which still isn't terrible. But it's harder to move those pieces without relationships and things based into play, which is really also a fine art borrow, is who are the people to know? Who do I trust? Who are movers and shakers? Who knows about art early? I mean, it's no different than great Magic vendors. That this person gives me a better price. This person is always the best buy list. They always update it the fastest. There's those people, you know who they are. Art isn't any different. It's just the hold time is a little longer on average, I would say, versus anything else in Magic that's collectible.
Yeah, I think we did kind of hint at this, right? Like I'll pass the mic over to you in a second when we kind of talk about how the pandemic has affected you. But you said like in the context of investing, right? Like a lot of these things are meant to be long-term holds, right? Like that's kind of drastically different than where Magic cards are, right? And usually Magic cards, like on the way most vendors operate, right? And I think that's where people need to kind of be able to delineate the difference, right? Is that, right? You're not going to win a piece at auction for something that came out for Zendikar Rising and then be able to sell it right in a month or two if you need money again or if you're looking to make your money back. That's not how this works.
No.
A big part of it is scarcity, right? There's only one, so you have to be able to let that mature. And a lot of people, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of people, I imagine, do buy this because they have some sort of attachment on some level to the art itself.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to just you know, I just want to dump my money in this kind of senselessly. Because you can kind of, to some extent, do that with Magic cards, right? Like it seems like, you know, the mantra for a long time, sure bet, buy dual lands, right? Like buy power, right? Whereas art, to my understanding, like it seems like a lot of people do feel attachment to a piece. I think that gives it probably a small premium, as it were, right? Like people say, like, I like the art, I like this card in my commander deck or something, right? Like that's probably a driving price for the art, and that's why that's why you have to kind of it's a weird thing when you look at it as an investment, right? That's kind of one of the strange things, right? Like we do talk about this, obviously, like fine art, a lot of people buy it because for investment purposes, because they think it could go up, but fine art obviously as well is one of those things where people feel attachment to it. That's kind of the nature of art, right? That's fundamentally, I think that's why art resonates with people so well, right? As opposed to just an asset, right? Like I can, like, there's only so much I can look at, like, you know, a brick of gold, right? Right. People buy gold, but people probably don't like open their vault every day and just admire their gold, right? Whereas art, you can hang it behind you, you can admire it, and I think that's
correct.
That's really why art, I think, has just really transcended time, right? It's something that's so valuable, right? People buy art from the 1500s. People are buying art from Zendikar Rising.
Right. You get that piece where if you can't play the game anymore every day, if you can't play the game, how do you stay connected to it? Okay, well, you can buy things and follow and read articles and things, but it's a very different thing when you get to see something and interact with something on a daily basis. And you can say, this had meaning to me. This still has meaning to me. It reminds me of this nostalgic time, nostalgic play I did. And I know this is a piece that I can resell, right? It's a different thing that you can interact with an investment, which is strange, as you mentioned. Like, you know, nobody has their gold laying and you recount it every, like, that's weird. But art has that. It has that meaning where you can see it and interact with it. There are people who don't care about that, though. Like, I want to make that clear. Like, most people do it because they're like, oh, I like this thing. It's a cat. I like cats. And you're like, yep, you do. But there are people that are like, this is just another fungible asset. It's just another thing. I'm going to get 8 of them this set. I'm going to sell 6 of them the next set. They exist too. There's room for them. But it's getting harder to do that. It's harder to go wide, to say, I want to get this many pieces of angels, and then I'm going to sell some, and then to rebuy new ones and so forth. It's because there's competition, right? It's not like there's 6 Black Lotuses that are Beckett graded X or Y. Here it's like there's a thing, you know who has the thing, or when there's a reprint of that thing, you're going to have to compete against that person because you know who that person is. And people have collecting preferences that are very well known. There's a major prominent goblin collector. There's a new goblin thing out. You will compete against him, and he probably will beat you. But it's good to know, so at least you can rely on that. Okay, in the future, I could sell to that guy. Oh, okay, that works. So that helps also because people have collecting preferences. It used to be called grail hunting, but then it got pretty weird with a couple people making it public, and then harassment of a couple people that had pieces, and then people wanted it for cheap. It was a whole thing. So people usually keep it closer to the chest unless they're super well known for what they collect.
Yeah, that's like one of the things. I think that's why art is kind of an interesting market as well, because a lot of the sales, because we're talking about things that are truly unique, right? Like, right, like in theory, someone could still open up an Alpha Black Lotus that would grade at a 9.5 or a 10. Unlikely, right, but that potential exists, right? Like that's not something we can definitively say will never happen. We don't know because there's probably a sealed alpha box out there where that can happen, right? But like once a piece sells, right, it's in some collector's hands, and because the nature of art, because there's a lot of hush hush, it's not always public, right? A lot of these people, for the reasons you described, don't want to be outed as owning this. One, because I think it's also a security issue as well.
Pieces have been stolen. That has existed. Pieces have been destroyed. Pieces were stolen out of people's cars, and they're just gone forever, probably thrown away, probably just missing in action, and those never come back. And there's a lot of those actually. So people try to avoid those as best they can. The more in depth they get in the our little niche.
Yeah, and I think like the kind of secretive nature of the art market has kind of been something that's scared people a little bit, I guess, because again, we did like I think I remember having a discussion with someone. I think I was like actually bidding on something at the time, and people were talking about like, man, if you look at some of these auctions, right, you see like, you know, X dollars coming in from PM1, and then a few minutes later, X plus $20 coming in from
Sure.
PM2,
Sure.
and then it
Sure.
goes back to PM1, right? Like,
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that? That's an art market thing that we could probably comment on if you'd like.
I'll let you jump into it.
Sure. Okay, so for people that don't know, if you've never been to an art auction, like a traditional art with the paddles, all that jazz, suits, whatever. There's always people that have bidding through the phone. That is incredibly common. Proxy bidding is what they call it. And there'll be someone on the phone, and they'll have a paddle, and then they'll be waiting on the thing and put it up in the air, and what have you. That is always a piece of any art sale that is common. It is known. And we accommodate that in our art market because there are people that don't want to be known that they're collecting. And that could be for privacy concerns. It could be for they don't want their spouse to know. A variety of reasons. Another big thing is that often when you have in-person sales, when women are bidding on art, they often get more bids from men to beat them. And that's just a common thing. So often a lot of the prominent women collectors I know will only bid by PM. So they don't lose that advantage. And there's other people that don't have Facebook accounts at all. They just don't. So they text me, Snapchat. I get emails from one person. I get direct messages on Twitter to say, here's my next bid. And literally I have to refresh the DM. It's the weirdest thing. But that's a limitation we have by being on Facebook. But were we to move to an only online auction site, the commentary and the community part would also then become difficult, incredibly difficult. Or to people in locked areas that I can't communicate well. I don't speak English all that well. Can I speak to you in German? And, you can get my bids across for me, or I'll be sleeping, which happens a lot. A lot of Germans and Italians are all they'll sleep in an auction, but they need bids in. That's also where these things go. So people worry about that an auctioneer makes up bids. But one thing we have as the admins, as part of the rules, is that whenever there's an issue there, auctioneers know that they have to provide proof that it happens. We don't get it very often. It's pretty rare. It's only happened a couple times. And then we just ask people, hey, send us screenshots. And then they'll be like, okay, here's the dollar amount. And you're going to say, oh, okay, that's a message. That's a real person, or I can tell that you didn't invent that because it has timestamps. Okay, that happens there. This happens there. Okay, yep, that's all in the good. These are real people. Fine. But if you see a lot of them, especially on the higher end auctions, you get into 30,000. Most people are not public. Even people that were bidding public will go private, and that's super common. It's part of how it works. But there is that reassurance to know that we take it incredibly seriously if people make up bids, if they retract bids. We ban people if they bid and then take it away, because it affects people's livelihoods. I mean, artists need food on the table for this because they don't get to go to conventions right now. They don't get to go to conferences right now and sell their art or prints. They don't get to. So an original art sale is incredibly important to that. So it's something we talk about every day and we actively work on. And I always encourage people to ask, can you give me some rough things? I'll be like, oh yeah, this person's from New York, or they're from Australia, or whatever, or they were sleeping or something. And we're always happy to accommodate in some of those ways to the best of our ability, but usually not in the moment because it's kind of distracting. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that level of security is something that I've never doubted, right, personally, because I'm familiar with at least most of the admins, right? I've met you, met a few others. There's a lot of people that are very active, right? Their reputation is worth so much more, right? That's kind of the nature
for
of this.
sure.
And,
for having a sunk auction that you've falsified it, I mean, it would cripple a person, literally cripple a person, and they would be run out of town. People take that integrity very seriously, down to you made this sketch after the fact. You made this painting after the fact. You made this color study after the fact. And some of that is what we're struggling with behind the scenes, is to say, how do we have proof? How do we know that the card image you did is these things? And those are fun things to know because we never needed to care because there was never enough money on the line. So now it's a cool thing for people to say like, okay, how can we show that? Will you now give us a time lapse at the time? And you're like, oh, cool, we get a time lapse now. Great. And it also proves you did the thing there. You can see it. So all of those kind of sophistication things really help with art making. In normal galleries, an agent works with an artist all the time and visits their studio, takes photos, takes provenance to prove that this is this. We're just itching to get that relevance and prominence that people require those things and want those things. Because even a certificate of authenticity can be faked. It's just a piece of paper. And art has been faked since BC times. I mean, that's normal. We haven't had that issue really yet. And we do have experts, very, very sharp-eyed, very, very well-known on like stylistic of how artists paint things, and other artists watch too. Other artists weigh in. It's pretty fun to see that. It's like, oh, they changed the style. Look at how much better this is. This is now a major work from them. And I'm like, this is an unplayable comment. They're like, yeah, but the art is great. And you're like, oh, okay. Let people know.
Yeah, I think like just kind of, I think these are all kind of growing pains as they were, right? Because like you had mentioned, right? Like, like naturally a few years ago, right? Like before I even knew about this, right? Like I wasn't really aware of art until I want to say probably, man, when did I probably want to say like 2017 or so, and then like obviously pieces then were like a fraction of what they are now, right? Like those prices are like long gone, and obviously like obviously with new attention, new eyes on the market, right? There's always going to be some people that are unscrupulous and trying to take advantage of certain things, but I think like
as always.
I think for the most part, right, I think like, the private bidding thing, that's something that's common. I think people have to kind of accept it, right? Like that's just the reality. Right. Like,
I mean, you could just not bid and not win it. Like that's the option, right? Like, right. Okay.
Yeah. Again, if you ever seen like, even just doing like heritage auction, if you ever been one, proxy bidding is something that is very, very commonplace. Even these rooms, even these, when they used to do live auctions, I've seen a few myself. The rooms are completely packed. So there are people that are there ready to bid on these things like coins, right? Like fine art, right? Like watches, wine, right? All these things. There's always going to be the live people, but a lot of the serious bidders, a lot of the people that really have the money, they're usually there by proxy, like by the phone, just because security issue, right? I think that's the biggest one. Privacy issue, like security and privacy, those are probably the top two. But like, again, I've never had any doubt in the art group. If in my mind, like I bid privately all the time. I think it's just, you just don't.
He does it too. He does it too. It's okay if you do because Ed does it.
But I would argue that, if anyone does have any concerns, like reach out to Mike, right? He's one of the admins. He's very visible about this. I'm sure you're a very busy man. I'm sure it may take some time to hear back from you, right? But I think if anyone does have any concerns, right, like messaging an admin, they'll be more than happy to, get your feet wet, right? Like a lot of it is very overwhelming, right? There's a lot going on, right? There's a lot of, big names in there. There's a lot of people that have been there for a while, right? Like, nepotism is kind of something that is something that
it is who at some stage, but you'd be amazed how many unique perspectives people have. Like, it's pretty surprising what people like that you don't expect people to. Like, obviously, if it's a dog or cat, like there's dog and cat people, like duh. But it's just some strange things that, I had this really weird interaction with this one card, and it's very personal to me. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, but that's cool. That's good for you. And for everything, it's amazing how many, when you start seeing the art, especially with reprinted things, that you have a personal connection to things, and it just draws you in. And we don't really have a word for it or phenomenon to it, but it's just, you feel a thing by seeing it. You're like, oh, this would be cool. I know what this is. I think this thing's neat. I want to buy this and put it on the wall, and it's an investment too. That seems kind of neat for me. And then you frame it, and that's also a personal journey to do and go from there.
Yeah, I think like this kind of ties back to like art just being, we clearly don't have a word for it, right? It's like window shopping to a whole different level, because there's probably a fair amount of people that had no intention of buying something. They see the art, it's like, I gotta have this, right? And I think like it's right. Obviously, some people have the luxury where money isn't as much of a concern, right? Where like they can afford to drop 5 digits or whatever on art, right? But I think like the fact that art does resonate with people in such a way where we can't really pinpoint it, right? Because all of us certainly have had the feeling of window shopping, right? You walk by, you see like I gotta own this, right? Like, probably most of us would break it down as to I have to own that foil for my deck, even though I have the non-foil version, it plays exactly the same, right? But
right. You need the hype, of that certain thing.
But art really just takes it to a whole different level.
Yeah.
So
The easy thing that I always have to put in as a plug is just reach out. Honestly, I'm manic about checking other messages, that other message folder in Facebook that drives everybody nuts. I constantly have to check that. I constantly have to check the outside direct messages on Twitter. It's just people are just curious about stuff. They want to know about stuff, and you'd think more people reached out, but they really don't. And I always would be happy to just explain, this is what's coming. This is what's going to happen with it. This is a secret layer. This is how this art differs from other stuff, and so on and so forth. So I always encourage people to reach out, because I'm not hard to find.
Yeah, and I think it's really part of growing the community, right? Because naturally, it's a win for everyone, right? When art is doing well, right? It's definitely a win for artists, I think. Right? I think art is one of those aspects of Magic that is probably underappreciated, right? It's easy enough for us to see, we see a card spoiled, this has cool art, right? But just thinking about what goes into it, kind of everything that's leading up to it, right, is so much more than that. And I think right, the visibility is good, right? There are obviously some downsides. We have people that, like you had mentioned, look at art as, hey, this is an asset, there's dollars attached, my goal is to get more dollars in the future, right? There are people that look at it that way. That's it's all part of it, right? And they're just as much of the community as someone that likes to collect cats, for example, right? Like you had mentioned. And just overall more visibility, I think does benefit the community overall. So anyone with questions, right, do reach out. I think just even the most basic questions, right? I've to be perfectly transparent, I've definitely asked the admins why I consider to be very dumb questions before. I know I've asked you why I consider to be very dumb questions.
Totally cool. It's
right.
fine.
So we're running a little bit long, so we'll go and wrap this up. What do you think the pandemic has done to the art market, right? In the context of collectibles overall, we obviously seen collectibles appreciate quite a bit, but what has the pandemic done to Magic art?
Well, we're not having any art shows. I mean, that's abundantly clear. But I think a big thing that's happening is people aren't eating out. People that have stable jobs. It's people that are not being impacted economically have more money to spend. I mean, full stop. And as people have some worry about a impending economic crash or some sort of depression or recession, people are sinking some money into art right now. People have been talking about this with old school cards and reserveless cards for the last couple weeks and such too. We're seeing some extent of that in the art market. Just some interesting things of surefire bets, surefire wins, things of those sort. People have been trying to buy a little more aggressively than you'd expect. And some of that is we just have oh, it's just more popular now. It's well, yeah, some of it. But also people are parking some assets as well for uncertainty they see in the market as well. How widespread is it? I can't tell. I don't know. But I am seeing an uptick at the top end major works that are new to come out, more than the minor works. Minor works, we're not seeing it as much. But the bigger ones, absolutely, we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think you had mentioned the people that are economically stable, right? You naturally you have a very different crowd, right? We're talking people that can afford to spend $2,000 or $40,000, very very different, right? Your minimum wage person, right? They may have to trim their Magic budget, right? The people that can afford $2,000 before, right? They're not really impacted by spending $2,000 right now.
Right.
And I think a lot of people do look at the collectible market, right? Just various assets as a way to park their money, right? It's always a good hedge against inflation, right? That's really what investing is, right? Money in your bank doesn't do anything for you. So it is interesting to see that, the art market really no different than any other set of assets, right?
Not really. No, I would say it's different on how it sells, but a lot of the behaviors is near identical.
Yeah, it's just slightly different from, again, your traditional group of what you think as a Magic player versus someone that plays Magic and is able to collect and own art as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a different person there. But usually it's a continuum. They start from somewhere, and And usually it's, playing things. They have their decks, they have their things already set up. And I'd like to think it's a life cycle of once you're past okay, I've got the collection, I've got the thing, I've got my decks, I've got the things that I will always keep. Then it's one step above that is usually how we describe it. And it does definitely warp your perspective on how much things cost. You're like, oh, well, that power is like, I don't know, like a half a painting. That's no big deal. And you're like, wait, no, it's still actually a lot of money. But you start to see the numbers and you get accustomed to it after a while. But right away, you're just like, oh, these are really expensive for that. But then you start seeing, oh, this is common. And then you get acclimated to it.
Absolutely. Last two things here. I assume we've kind of touched on the pandemic. I think that's, more or less. Last two thoughts here. So this one's kind of a more personal one. How do you draw the line between something you enjoy and something that you invest in? Right. Because I know you own art yourself, right?
I do. I own a bunch.
And I assume that you do have some sort of personal connection to art that's more than just dollars, right? Because I think the majority of us probably, if we were just concerned about dollars, right, there's definitely better ways to do this.
Yeah. For investment things, this is not the best investment thing. Like, there's better investments. Don't get me wrong. For me, it's award-winning art. I collect a couple from different artists that I like working with, and I just like them as people, and I like their art. Award-winning art is things I look at. There isn't really a bump to award-winning art yet, because there hasn't been a ton of it. But that's something I look at personally. And the other things I look at is art from like style guides, because I like to see like that creative process, right? So when I buy a painting, my goal is to get the painting, the sketch, the thumbnails, which are like the little sketches, composition things, everything in the process. Because again, I do art shows. So my goal is to show painting, so people can appreciate, oh, this is how this went to that. Here's the art description. Here's how it got there. Cool, neat. But I like to see that too around my house. So sometimes I even want those that are before the art description. They make these style guides, these guide books that explain what the world looks like or smells like or whatever. In Ravnica, it's like, this is Boros. This is what Boros looks like. And you're like, cool. But that art gets made in-house at Wizards. A lot of it is digital, like 99% is digital. But some are traditional. And I like collecting those because then I put those along in that process of how an artwork was made. They're not all super expensive, but they don't look like the final card because they're a nugget of an idea of like Ral Zarek would kind of look like this, but it doesn't look like Ral Zarek. Those are the things I collect personally, and they're not worth a ton. They don't resell all that well. They're not really highly coveted, but I just think they're cool because that's my intention, is to show the process.
Have you ever had to struggle with something like, kind of in the same vein? Like, have you ever had to deal with something like someone wants this piece, right? You own someone's grail or whatever, but this is yours, your personal attachment versus there's dollars attached to this, right? Like how?
Of course, I've dealt with that. Of course. Usually people wear me down. To be honest with you, Ed, it's usually not the first thing. I'm just like, no, it's not for sale. But people that really want their thing are pretty persistent. I think I've sold like 2 works in the past year and a half. And both people were like really persistent at it. They're like, I really want this thing. And their asking prices weren't nothing. Usually when I get an inquiry, it's like, I'll give you $2,000 for it. I'm like, I paid that 8 years ago. That's not what it costs. But the people that have serious actual amounts and are serious about how it gets shipped and are serious about wanting it, I think of it as, again, curatorial Mike thinking, this person loves this. They're going to take care of it. They're probably not going to resell it. And if I do a future art show, they'll probably lend it because they want other people to appreciate it. So it's kind of how I think it through, but I personally don't like selling works. I just don't, it just doesn't work for me because why would I don't buy things to resell them. I buy them to appreciate them. And I don't own a ton of magic works compared to what people think. But the ones I have are, they mean something to me. I played with them. There's a story behind me hanging out with an artist, having drinks at a convention, and we bought it that night. Like formidable memories with them. I don't have very many pieces that are just bought on a whim anymore. Like they're pretty uncommon for me now. But you start out somewhere, right? You got to start with something. And that's just kind of the life cycle of collecting for a while, I would say.
Yeah, that is something I do kind of struggle with, right? Because again, I am simply the way my brain works, right? It's just a matter of thinking, you know, I'm very numbers person, right? Like the kind of magic has trained me to be a numbers person, right? This is kind of my background. It's very hard for me to be able to draw a line between, you know, what is a hobby, what is something I enjoy versus like these are assets, these are money, there's dollars involved. I was able to make that jump relatively easily once I started to become a Magic vendor, right? It's just I have no attachment to my cards anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And in theory, with Magic cards, almost everything is replaceable, right? Like if I really want it, I will buy it again. And I think that is something you're giving me that look, right? Like
it's very different. Yes. If you can replace it easy, the attachment isn't the same.
Right. And like in your case, right, the people like, you know, your two pieces that you sold, right? That person simply can't say, oh, like, you know, it's too much, I'm gonna go somewhere else, because there's nowhere else, right? Like it's you and these people that do throw money at this, right? Like it's a very different mentality than eventually.
Yeah, and when you have super hard to find things, people will contact you a lot. That's why the secretive part of it is good, because I mean, it's not that I'm afraid that people are going to break into my house, but it's more of like, I just don't want the same meshes 40 times a week, right? I just don't need that.
Right. If you weren't selling it like a day ago, like sleeping about it overnight probably hasn't changed. The fact that you're not, you're not selling it now, right? That's
exactly right. So some of the newer pieces I have are just quieter stuff. If people visit my house, or you know, they're over for a Grand Prix in Minneapolis, like of course I'll show people. That's totally fine. They can pet my wiener dogs, whatever. But I don't actively put it out there.
Very cool. So one last thought is on the outline. So this is something you have to answer on the fly. If I said you have $100,000, but you can't see that money back for 5 years, what would you do with it? It can be anything. It doesn't have to be art related. This is just a fun.
$100,000.
Not for 5 years. You don't see it back for 5 years.
Oh, you don't see it back for 5 years. Do I have to spend it all in one go, or
nope.
Can I split it up?
You can spend $100,000 on $1 things, or whatever, or $100,000 thing, or what have you.
Okay, yeah, there's something I would absolutely do. There's only a handful of reclusive artists. Okay, artists that either do not want to be found or cannot be found. One example would be J.W. Frost did the 5th edition Islands. Nobody knows. Is it a man? Is it a woman? We don't know. We know Canadian, and that's it. No clue. Eric Peterson, great example, does not want to be contacted. The artist Eric Peterson did a bunch of stuff. Living Wish, great example, just does not want to be contacted at all, period. But if you had a large enough sum, you know, you need a significant amount of money to make it to say, listen, I'd like to buy a couple pieces from you. And I'd like to get some signed cards from you. And then you're the only one who has that. And those reclusive artists would be one, that'd be the first thing. Wouldn't need 100,000 for that. The second thing is a bit morbid. Hate to say this. There are some artists in poor health, like because some of them are getting older. There's some artists in poor health that will not be signing cards forever. Period. They will not. So people that want a signed artist proof set, or wants a sketch by a person, or which wants a signed card, whatever those things are, there's probably 5 to 10 people that I would use every dollar I can to just have them working a lot, as much as they'd be up to do. But it'd have to be large sums. And I would find those and just go through those people, be like, all right, I'm going to give you $10,000. Can you sign oodles? Can you do sketches? Can you do anything? Because again, as a curatorial person, long term, those people are gone, right? Like there will be no more Quentin Hoover signatures ever. They're done. There will never be a sketch on another back of an artist proof for his. Christopher Rush. You want a signed black border lightning bolt? Good luck. That's gone. I've got a pair of German ones for some reason signed. I don't even know why I have them, but I have them. But finding those things is what I would look into. And since artists, you can't just buy that. You have to go out of your way. You'd have to visit them. You'd have to fly them in. You'd have to take care of it. It'd be this probably transcendent experience of working with an artist one-on-one to say, like, let's work on legacy things for you. Let's work on getting a large sum of money to you to provide for your family for the future. That's kind of how I would work that through, where it would be investment, helping the artist, and also looking at a future thing that people will want and need, I guess, in the future. That's probably what I would do.
Yeah, just kind of on that last bit, like it is morbid, right, to think about, right? But like for the people that, especially when you talk about people that did the alpha beta stuff, right? This is 27 years ago. These people were working on these projects, right? Any of these artists at the time, right? 27 years ago, right? Like we're talking about when even in their working prime, like best case scenario, right? They were 25, like mid 20s when they started, right? They're 52 now, right? They're right, like they may be still in good health, right? But like that's a long time ago. You mentioned that there's a fair amount of artists. I know that there's some people out there, like some signatures, just kind of as a nature of just buying collections and random things. Some of them are incredibly difficult to find. Some of these items, like, you know, people just didn't sign a lot. I believe, just anecdotally, I think I can't remember where it was, but I was at an event. Someone had foil Japanese signed Tangle Wire, and the artist for that, to my understanding, only signed at like one event or something before I think I don't know if it was passed away. My memory's very hazy, but I remember there was something that was very, very unique about this. It was some sort of
Glenn is no longer with us. Glenn has passed away.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Glenn Angus did not sign often.
Yeah. So like that one, right? Like there's really not that many of them. Like that person, whatever they were asking at the time, probably too little. Realistically, right? But again, that's just kind of the reality of it, right? It's unfortunate that we have to think about this, right? But like a lot of artists, like you mentioned, in ailing health, probably very aged. The turnover, I imagine, something that we didn't talk about at all, but I imagine turnover among artists is pretty high because, like you had mentioned, there's always going to be a new 23-year-old that is a rising star at their art school, right? And like they want their job.
Yeah, there's a famous quote by Todd Lockwood, who did Dungeons and Dragons and a variety of other things. And Todd Lockwood talks about he's not worried about his colleagues, you know, making the dragon instead of him, right? Like he made a lot of dragons. He's always worried about the 24-year-old because if the 24-year-old beats him to a dragon commission, that person has that many more years to keep doing it, right? And at that point, what do? You know, it's becoming old-fashioned and so on. So it's always really stuck with me to really think that. That's why some people are like still going so hard on minor cards because they know the pipeline's there. And to be known as a Magic artist, immediately you're paying yourself for $2,000. Immediately. Like other brands don't have that. They just don't. So by being able to stay there, you become noteworthy for that. It becomes a tab on your website, literally Magic Art, and people click on it because there's enough people that want signed artist proof, signed cards, prints. What's your original situation like? Like it's just a natural part that is rapid. And in the art community, since there's only one of one, sometimes you race to get to someone, you get to them first, you buy the art and you win. Cool, good for you. But that doesn't happen with anything else. Like most people like not racing to buy your cover of a book. That's just not how that works. Comic book covers, sure, that also is that, but they usually have agents that have set things and normalize things. Magic artists don't have that like gallery representation where it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to put this in my fall show. No, it just goes.
No, that's all very good points. We will wrap this up here. I don't want to take too much more of your time. We are running a bit long. So Mike, I do thank you being on here, answering our questions. You know, it's always a joy when we have guests on in their relative expertise, be able to comment on things that they're passionate about, things that they can speak deeply to. So it's always great to have you on. As always, you can find me on Twitter at edwin13. You can find the social media sites for Vermilion on the right here. Mike, where can people find you if they would like to contact you in any capacity?
Twitter's always easiest at Vorthos Mike, but literally you can write in Magic Art Mike or like Magic Art Market Vorthos, and I literally pop up because I've written for a while. That works too, and you'll find me through social channels, whatever. I'm writing on Cool Stuff Inc. or hanging out in the Facebook page where you'll definitely see me in there, and I'll say hello if you want to stop by.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, if you are not a part of the MTG Art Market, that's the name of the Facebook group, do yourself a service, join right away. Even if you don't plan on buying, right? Like there's plenty of window shoppers. A lot of people like to look a lot of people on there do display the art that they have. We see some very interesting living rooms, right, that are very art filled. I think those are always cool to see. Mark has posted a few times. Jeff has posted a few times, right? Like those are kind of the ones I think of, right? Cool living rooms, people that go very deep on this. It's very cool to look at. So, with that being said, thank you again, Mike. I do appreciate you being here. Thank you to all listeners who have joined us, and wherever you are in the world, stay safe. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back on Monday.
Take care.